In Union County, North Carolina, 74-year-old Silas Vance was facing a $12,000 battle with the county code enforcement. His enemy was not a man, but an unstoppable, invasive wall of multiflora rose that was slowly swallowing his 18-acre family farm. The government wanted him to dump hundreds of gallons of toxic chemicals on his soil. But Silas had a secret weapon, one with horns, hooves, and an appetite for complete destruction. Before the battle could begin, there was only the thicket. For 30 years, the rose had been quietly, relentlessly taking the pasture. It started back when Silas's knees first began to stiffen in the damp autumn mornings, and his late wife, Martha, stopped keeping her Rhode Island red chickens in the old cedar post run. Once the chickens were gone and the mower stopped running, the first green shoots appeared. Multiflora rose was originally introduced to the American South in the 1930s by government agents who called it a living fence. They told the grandfathers of Union County that it would stop erosion, keep cattle in, and never need painting. The farmers believed them, but the rose did its job too well. By the late 90s, it was out of control. Now, on Silas's land, the thicket stood 8 feet high in dense, interlocking domes that looked like frozen green waves. The canes at the base were as thick as shovel handles, covered in curved yellow thorns that could tear a canvas work jacket to ribbons in a single step. Underneath those heavy domes, the air was stagnant, dark, and cold. No grass could grow, and no sunlight could penetrate. There was only dead wood, choking dust, and bare red clay. Silas stood at the rim of the hollow, watching the green wall. He wore a faded blue denim shirt with brass snaps, washed so many times the fabric was soft as flannel, and a gray cap from the Union County Co-op. His hands were thick and heavily calloused, the knuckles permanently swollen from 40 winters of wet grease, cold wrenches, and heavy oak firewood. He did not look at the rose with anger. He looked at it the way a man looks at a leaky barn roof or a worn-out clutch. It was simply a debt that had come due. The quiet of the afternoon was broken by the sound of tires on gravel. A white 2022 Chevrolet Silverado pulled into the lane, its clean, high-dollar tires throwing up small puffs of red clay dust. The truck was spotless, and the driver's side door bore the green seal of the Soil and Water Conservation District. A young man climbed out. His name was Marcus. He wore clean khaki trousers, leather work boots that had never smelled manure, and a sharp blue polo shirt with a small government logo on the chest. In his hand, he carried an iPad protected by a heavy rubber case. Marcus was 28, and he had arrived to enforce the county's clock. Marcus walked to the edge of the clearing, took one look at the massive wall of tangled green and gray briars, and tapped his screen with a stylus. "We got the cost share approved, Mr. Vance," Marcus said. His voice was bright and fast, carrying the absolute confidence of a man who lived in spreadsheets and air-conditioned offices. $12,480. The state is covering 75% of it. That's over $9,000 in funding. We bring in a contractor out of Monroe with an ASVRT 120 forestry mulcher, and he'll grind this entire mess to wood chips in just 4 days. Then we follow up with 2 quarts of triclopyr per acre, twice a year for 3 years. We kill the root heads before they can ever sucker. Silas didn't look at the iPad. His eyes were locked on a red-tailed hawk circling high over the creek bottom, riding the warm afternoon thermals. "The mulcher," Silas said, his voice slow and dry as corn husks. "It has rubber tracks?" 60-inch wide, Marcus said. "High-flow hydraulics. It'll eat 3-inch pines like matchsticks." "That clay is soft near the branch," Silas said, pointing with a thick finger toward the low ground. "A 30-ton machine will rut it 3 feet deep. When the rain comes in November, those ruts will turn into ditches. The water won't have nowhere to go but down the middle. It'll carry the soil right down to the rocky river. Marcus tapped his screen again, his stylus making a sharp plastic clicking sound. The contract includes a seeding plan. 30 pounds of Kentucky 31 fescue per acre, lime, and 300 pounds of triple 19 fertilizer. We stabilize the soil within 10 days of the mechanical clear. Silas reached out, rolling a dry rosehip between his fingers. It was small, red, and hard as lead buckshot. You can't stabilize clay with fescue once you've poisoned the dirt. The seed won't take, and the rose will just come right back anyway. There's 40 years of seed waiting under there, just waiting for the sun to hit it. Marcus smiled, the patient, patronizing smile of a specialist dealing with an old farmer who still remembered mule plows and hand scythes. The chemical has a residual soil life, Mr. Vance. It prevents the seeds from establishing. It's science. The machine does the heavy work, and the chemical does the rest. Silas took his hands out of his pockets. He adjusted his cap, pulling the brim down low, looking Marcus dead in the eye. I don't think I'll sign. Marcus stopped tapping. He looked up, his brow furrowed. Mr. Vance, the state is covering over $9,000 of this. It's a $12,000 job. If you don't clear this, the county will code you for noxious weeds by spring. The seed is blowing onto the Miller property next door, and they are already planning a subdivision. They won't tolerate it. I'll clear it, Silas said. How? Marcus asked. He looked at Silas's old tractor parked under the tin-roofed shed. A 1974 Massey Ferguson 135 with a leaky lift arm and a rusted 5-foot bush hog. You can't back that Massey into this. You'll puncture your front tires before you go 10 feet, and you know it. I have some help coming, Silas said. The help arrived 2 days later, just as the morning mist was clearing from the hollows. It came in a rusted 16-foot stock trailer pulled by a faded 1994 Ford F250 with a straight-six engine that idled with a heavy, wet click. The driver, a man named Earl from down near Peachland, finished his cigarette as the engine cooled, then climbed down in oil-stained overalls. He was a man who didn't believe in hurry. Behind the wooden slats of the trailer, 31 pairs of yellow, square-pupiled eyes watched the red clay pasture. They were Kiko goats. These weren't the soft, fat, spotted pygmies people kept in suburban yards, nor the heavy dairy goats that needed sweet grain, fancy mineral blocks, and draft-free shelters. These were New Zealand stock, bred in the wet, rocky hills of the southern hemisphere to survive on nothing but brush and wild pasture. They had long, flat horns that swept back like scimitars, thick coats of coarse white and tan hair, and legs like hickory pegs. They didn't make a sound. They just stood in the dark of the trailer, smelling the pungent scent of the rose, waiting. 30 does, Earl said, spitting into the dry grass. And the buck. He's the one with the black shoulder. Don't go in the pen with him if you're carrying a bucket of feed. He thinks everything in this county belongs to him. Silas pulled a thick manila envelope from his denim jacket, counting out $600 in $20 bills. $600 for the month? Silas asked. Earl nodded, taking the cash and tucking it into his bib pocket. $600. And I'll come check the buck's hooves next week. He's got a habit of throwing a shoe on the limestone. The fence is hot? Silas asked. 12,000 volts, Earl said, pointing to a small solar-powered Gallagher charger resting on the trailer tongue. If they touch it once, they'll stay 3 feet back. But you've got to move that orange net every 4 days. If you leave them in one spot too long, they'll start looking at the sky, figuring out how to get over. A hungry goat is a smart goat. Silas nodded. He'd spent the entire day before dragging 3-foot-high orange polywire netting around the first half-acre of the rose thicket. He'd cleared the path with nothing but a pair of handheld loppers, his 74-year-old back aching with every single cut, his forearms mapped with thin, angry red scratches where the rose had clawed through his heavy shirt. They dropped the trailer ramp, and the heavy oak wood hit the red dirt with a solid thud. The goats didn't rush or stampede. They walked out in a single, quiet, orderly line, their hooves clicking sharply on the wood. The buck came last, his broad chest forward, his beard stained yellow, tasting the hot southern wind. When they reached the edge of the rose, they didn't hesitate. Where a human sees a wall of impenetrable thorns, a Kiko goat sees a 5-star salad bar. One of the mature does reached up, sank her flat teeth into a rose cane as thick as her leg, and peeled back a 6-foot strip of bark with a single, upward jerk of her head. She began to chew with a steady, rhythmic grind, her eyes half closed in deep satisfaction. Nearby, another doe wedged herself deep into the center of a massive briar dome, using her heavy horns to pry the thorny canes apart, reaching for the fresh green leaves hidden where the frost couldn't touch them. "They'll eat the leaves first," Earl said, leaning his weight against his truck's fender and watching them work. "Then the small twigs. After that, they'll strip the bark clean off the big canes. Once that bark is gone, the cane can't draw water. It dies. By December, you'll have nothing left out here but white, skeleton wood." "They'll need water," Silas said. "They'll drink some from the creek," Earl replied. "But most of what they need is right there in the leaf. They're tough. They don't mind the clay, and they don't mind the briars." He climbed back into his old Ford. The starter ground twice, a dry mechanical screech, before the engine finally caught, and he drove away, leaving a long trail of blue oil smoke hanging low in the cedar trees. By Saturday, the news of Silas's herd had made its way down Highway 74, straight into the Union County feed and seed. Inside, the air was thick and sweet, smelling of molasses, fertilizer, and wet leather boots. 3 local farmers sat on red plastic chairs near the register, watching the autumn rain beat against the dusty glass. "Silas has lost his mind," Billy Anson said, shaking his head. Billy farmed 400 acres of dryland corn near Indian Trail, and he was a man who believed in diesel power and large bank loans. He's got 31 goats sitting out in that briar patch. They're going to get torn to pieces by the coyotes coming out of the river bottoms, and then the county is going to fine him anyway. Ben, the young clerk behind the counter, didn't even look up from his ledger. "They're Kikos, Billy. They don't die easy. My uncle had some in Virginia. They'll eat the rust off a tractor if you let 'em." "I don't care what breed they are," Billy shot back, spitting a stream of dark tobacco juice into a plastic cup. "A goat can't eat a rose cane. Those thorns are like catfish fins. They'll tear their stomachs wide open. He's wasting time." An old farmer named George, who had been quiet in the corner, cleared his throat. "I tried to pull a patch of multiflora rose with my John Deere back in '84. Hooked a heavy logging chain to the root crown, put it in low gear, and let the clutch out. The chain snapped. Took the windshield right out of the cab and missed my temple by an inch. That rose don't come out for nothing." "Well," Billy spat, "I give 'em 3 weeks. Tops. Then Silas will be crawling back to the county for that heavy ASV mulcher. Only by then, the state grant will be long gone, and he'll be on the hook for the full $12,000 out of his own pocket. A 74-year-old man has no business being that stubborn." The men in the chairs nodded in silent agreement. It was a comfortable prediction. It allowed them to believe that the world was simple, that heavy diesel and expensive chemicals were the only ways to hold back the woods, and that Silas Vance was just another stubborn relic waiting to be cleared away. But Silas never showed up at the feed and seed to buy chemical spray or hire a machine. Every morning at 6, before the sun could burn the heavy white mist off the pasture, Silas walked down to the ravine. He carried nothing but a 5-gallon bucket of fresh spring water and a short hickory stick to balance himself on the slick clay. The October frost came on the 22nd, turning the ditch grass white and freezing the red clay into hard, brittle cakes. The goats didn't care. In the crisp, cold air, their breath billowed in sharp puffs of white steam. They had already cleared the first half-acre. It wasn't a neat clearance, and it didn't look like the clean, level work of a commercial forestry mulcher. It looked like a battlefield. The massive domes of multiflora rose were completely gone, replaced by a gray, dead tangle of bare, peeled canes. For the first time in 30 years, the forest floor was finally visible. It lay buried under a thick, rich layer of dark manure and shredded organic matter, pressed deep into the clay by 124 small, sharp hooves. Silas unplugged the Gallagher charger. His hands were numb, and his breath was white in the cold morning air as he pulled the plastic step-in posts from the frozen soil. He moved the orange netting 20 yards further into the thicket, carving a new lane through the heavy rows with nothing but his hand shears. The herd waited at the edge of the old paddock. They did not try to escape. They watched Silas work in total silence, tracking every movement of his hands. 124 sharp hooves stood perfectly still in the cool Carolina clay. When he hooked the wire back to the battery and flipped the switch, the charger hummed, sending its sharp, rhythmic click through the line. "Go on," Silas said quietly. The buck went first, his heavy horns snapping a brittle, frozen cane as he pushed deep into the fresh briars, his does following in a quiet, hungry line. To understand why the goats were succeeding where machines failed, you had to understand the biology of the plant. A forestry mulcher works by sheer mechanical force. It tears and rips the canes, but it leaves the massive, starch-heavy root crown completely intact in the dirt. To a plant like multiflora rose, that mechanical trauma is just a signal to fight back. Sensing the threat, the underground root sends up 5 new, aggressive shoots for every single cane that was severed by the steel teeth of the machine. The machine addresses the symptom, not the source. The goats, however, worked by starvation. By consuming every single green leaf the very second it emerged to catch the sun, they forced those giant, tuberous roots to continuously expend their stored starch reserves to grow new foliage. But with no leaves left to perform photosynthesis, there was no way for the plant to replenish those reserves. Beneath the quiet soil, the massive root systems were dying from the inside out, rotting in the cold red clay. By the end of October, the first half-acre was dead. The rows had nothing left but bare white wood, standing like bleached bones in the gray Carolina light. Silas had spent exactly $600 of his own money, and his topsoil was safe. Marcus returned on the first Tuesday of November. The autumn rains had started, and the gravel lane was slick with red mud. He didn't climb out of his Silverado immediately. He sat in the idling cab for a long minute, looking down into the hollow where the green wall used to be. When he finally got out, he didn't bring his iPad. He wore his yellow leather work boots, but he stepped carefully, trying to avoid the deep puddles of red water forming in the tire tracks. Silas was sitting on an overturned white oak log near the fence line, slowly sharpening his pocket knife with a small gray Arkansas pocket stone. The steady, rhythmic whisper of the steel against the stone was the only sound besides the rain. Marcus walked down the slope, his eyes moving from the bare, sheep-manured ground to the high, clean trunks of the old walnut trees that had finally been freed from the strangling vines. The water in the creek bottom ran clear and cold over the gray limestone, empty of the red silt that usually choked it after a hard rain. He stopped 10 feet from Silas, looking at the 31 goats grazing quietly on the wild ryegrass that had already begun to sprout in the newly sunlit spaces. "How much did you spend on feed?" Marcus asked. His voice didn't have its spreadsheet confidence anymore. It was quiet, almost respectful. "Nothing," Silas said, not looking up from his knife. "The feed was standing right there when they got here." "The contractor from Monroe called me yesterday," Marcus said, looking down at his boots. "The ASV mulcher got stuck in the clay on a job over in Stanley County. Broke a track tensioner. They're backed up 3 weeks, and the county is already over budget on the cost-share program." Silas turned the knife over, testing the edge against the hair on his thick forearm. A clean, bald stripe appeared on his skin. He closed the blade with a sharp, dry click. "A machine doesn't know when to stop," Silas said, looking out over the quiet land. "It only knows how to tear. It don't have no patience." Marcus didn't say anything to that. He reached down, picked up a handful of the dark, goat-manured soil from the edge of the pasture, let it crumble slowly through his fingers, and then wiped his hand on his trousers. He looked at the clear creek, then back at the old man. He nodded once, a short, clean gesture of understanding, and walked back up the hill to his truck. Silas Vance proved that sometimes the old ways aren't just slower, they are better. But winter is coming to North Carolina, and Silas still has 2.5 acres of the dense rows along the Miller property line to clear before the county's spring deadline. Will this Kiko herd survive the freezing winter and finish the job? If you want to see if Silas and his goats can beat the clock, hit that subscribe button and click the video on your screen right now to see how we build the winter shelter for the herd. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the homestead.